it's a pleasure for me to moderate this panel because we have an interesting dynamic of both myself as the moderator, and in some respect, I'm going to be speaking maybe a bit more than moderating at first at the beginning. But we're covering the kind of the whole life cycle of what it is to make and execute on a better brand decision today amongst the folks that we have today. So for myself, I'm the founder of Avasta. We are going and doing a lot of work in identifying where the winnable addressable market is for companies and how that affects revenue and demand attribution and ultimately ties to business value. And the basis of this panel is around utilizing the Challenger Index, which was a co-creation using principles that are very, very familiar here at MASB, which is the brand evaluation standard, which is measure market demand over time from the perspective of the people that are actually willing to pay money. It's a shocking concept that has never been considered before and is absolutely revolutionary and is only valid if we forget everything from the past century. So along this, I'm going to let each of the folks introduce themselves briefly, but we'll start with Chris in terms of your background, and we'll go from there.
Cool, thanks, Edgar. Yeah, so Chris Young, Senior Vice President, Global Head of Sales for InnovateMR. We're a global data collection provider, providing research services, especially third-party access to global B2B and B2C audiences. So we partner with global agencies, consultancies, providing access to B2B and B2C audiences, especially for Avasta and the Challenger Index.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Dennis Hahn. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of Liquid. We're a brand consulting and activation agency. And we work across B2B, B2C, and we're 24 years old in business. We're a partner with Avasta and co-creator of the Liquid Avasta Challenger Index, which you'll be hearing a little bit about today.
All right, and my name is Robin. I am the founder and CEO of Lightbeam. That's a boutique marketing research firm based in New York, and probably the only practitioner in this room who's in the field. So that's the perspective I'm bringing. I was a past president of QRCA, if you guys know that organization. It's a global qualitative consultants organization, and laureate from the Insights Association as well. So that's the perspective I'm bringing.
And I'm looking forward to it. So Joanna and I did not collaborate on the Greek theme today, but we will be covering Nike, which is Greek in origin. So we're going to go from Kronos to Nike today. But that part is there. And there's a lot that we can go and cover. So as you've had the chance to meet myself and the panelists that are here. And what we're doing is we're going to leverage information that we've collectively chosen to contribute into the public domain from the Challenger Index. And the whole purpose of this is to kind of leverage the expertise that we have around brand evaluation and how to also look at this data from the point of view that an organization can leverage objective customer or consumer sourced information as to which way is the category going and why. And this was in reaction to kind of a collective decision that we went and made into investing into something like this, because a lot of other brand related activities that are out there are looking usually at snapshots in time and trying to extrapolate into the future based on past trends. Instead, what we went and developed was, well, what if we went and used the brand evaluation standard, which is, what do you think the future is going to look like and how does it translate back to the present? And then let's see if that is happening. So that's kind of the basis of it that's here. And you're welcome to go download the reports. And today you're going to be able to see some of the stuff underneath the hood. And feel free to ask us anything about this as we go through it. So why are we going and bringing this here? And I'm asking a really basic question here to the room, which is, our demographic differences more fundamental at driving purchase behavior than people want to admit? So why am I asking this? Because it seems to have disappeared in modern marketing and brand and business building discourse. There's a lot of opinions that are gone and created. A lot of organizations are going and inventing products or services or solutions that go and have product market fit, get to some kind of an initial demand that is there for it. And then after that, they forget why they were successful in the first place. And a lot of larger organizations have stopped doing this type of segmentation where they're actually going to the consumer or the customer and trying to find out the range of whys, why products and brands are being purchased, and it is going and creating a problem. And this is something that we started noticing in the data analysis that we were doing in the Challenger Index, utilizing these objective methodologies that MASB has been a big part of for, close to 2 decades now. So does this also go and affect your enterprise and brand value more than people want to go and admit? And the answer is yes. So several years ago, Jim Gregory, for some of you who will know his name well, from MASB, the two of us went and did an audit of Kraft Heinz after their stock absolutely plummeted after their IPO, because they went and said within 2 years after doing a comprehensive brand valuation, oopsie, we forgot that some of our customers are dying. And they had gone and taken an average demand estimate or preference estimate for brand value, used it to inform their brand valuation, which was the super majority of their IPO value of tens of billions of dollars. And they went and said, well, we forgot to take into account that younger customers don't have the same brand preference as our older customers. And because this is an indefinite life asset, we have to reduce the estimated value. Anybody know what happened to the stock when they announced this? Anybody have a wild guess as to how much it dropped? How much? 80? No, well, pretty close, but like, yeah. So they dropped about 50% and they've never recovered. And that was from a one little error of going and saying, hey, we overestimated brand preference for our customer base because we never looked at it as a time-based cohort. Mark Stouts knows exactly what I'm talking about there. But if you don't understand what your value is going to be over time, and especially what your customer base, the demand that is informing your revenue is going to be over time, you're going to go and have a problem. So this has gone and created this information to us. So we are here to kind of go and share with you what does it take to get to the next level. So we're going to talk about Nike, who just had wonderful news today about their revenue going down the tubes. And what is shocking is this is what we expected last year when we went and ran the Challenger Index. That despite the fact that it's one of the stronger brands in the category, there's a lot of hair on Nike. And I think we all kind of collectively know it, but we actually understand the composition of why this is going and happening. So I'm going to be going and kind of walking you through briefly what we're going and seeing here. Here's the demographic relationship between Nike and challenger brands. So the Hokas, the Ongs, the Brooks of the world that you might be recognizing. And what it's going and showing is that Nike actually does well in the younger generations and really precipitously drops off in category association for athletic shoes. This is a $15 billion category, by the way, in the US alone. The minute you kind of hit to about 45 plus. And after that, it's really no different. In fact, it gets worse. So why is this important? Well, where's the purchasing power in these audiences? Anybody know? It's over 45. That's where the money is being spent. Interest doesn't translate to financial performance. And this is what we, I think, always forget about. And so to be able to get to this answer for any organization, you need to be able to understand what it takes today to be able to get to these insights. So if you look at the individual brands, you'll go and see that there's a variance between Nike and its kind of key competitors that is there by age group. And Nike is doing well in some audiences, but not so well in others. And there's other brands, the emergent brands like Hoka, On, and Brooks are increasingly becoming stronger and stronger in perceptions and in expected purchase intent. So while they are small, they're like piranhas chipping away at Nike's market leadership. So what does this mean? This means that if you don't understand where you're losing potential and share in the component parts, you're not going to be able to make the types of decisions that you need to succeed as an organization. So I'm going to now bring this question to the panel. How do you avoid the tyranny of averages? And this is also a catalyst of what we've gone and talked about so far this morning around the data quality that we go and use. And I'm actually going to go and open this with Chris Young, who leads the organization that worked with us to actually get to the consumers that informed the study. And this is where scrutiny around data quality is so critical. To complete the consumer study, we started with 19,000 consumers, and we ended up with about 4,000 that were credible buyers of the category. And I'd love to, Chris, just share a little bit about what does it take today in the domain of primary research to get to representation of real buyers and real consumers.
Yeah, so I think it starts in a couple of different areas, especially when you're utilizing third-party channels, especially for recruiting your consumers. When you look at the online data world as a whole, it's a very dirty place, right? I don't think there's any mystery about that. And we candidly go up against synthetic data pretty regularly as far as that discussion goes. I think that really, when you're looking at the representation, it's important to understand not just the demographic representation, but the channel of which it's being sourced. So for example, when we're sending out a representative sample based to our surveys, and we run thousands of surveys on a regular basis. We're not just looking at the front end quality standards that we're putting in place to ensure not just technological types of approaches. So we use digital fingerprinting, we use Twilio API verifications. We do a lot of different technological approaches, but also methodological approaches as well. So we actually, when we're recruiting our members to our networks, we're actually using behavioral information to assess what the representation looks like, not just at a demographic level, but then also a behavioral level as well. So I think just from like a quality side, that's super important. And then also, what is the process for which you're collecting that data as well? A lot of traditional methods for recruiting representative responses is basically balanced on completes. We have a process at Innovate where we actually send out clicks. So it's balancing representation based off of who is actually starting the survey rather than who is completing the survey. So, and I think lastly, something that we regularly see with agencies, the sample panel world is very commoditized. It's really becoming a price to the bottom, unfortunately. Which is not showing a lot of respect to the humans who are participating in the surveys that we're asking them to. But sample companies are kind of thought of as like an aftermath, essentially. We're brought to the table very late in the process. And so something that we always tell our agencies, and Edgar and Avasta has been great about it, they bring us to the table at the very beginning of the research project, which is great. Understanding any potential, representative holes that we may have within sampling, understanding any, firmographic if we're doing B2B research. So there's a few different angles whenever trying to assess the representation.
That's great. And I want to build on, I think JP went and mentioned earlier, right? Like you got to be able to get to that level of quality. And this is where we're at. Like the floor to be able to go and get consumer and customer insight today is astronomically higher than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And I think a lot of organizations are kind of going and missing it. And what's typically is happening is just go and give me an average American panel and go and test my brand in it. And what we've actually learned working with Innovate in terms of understanding, like, is it even feasible, is that the average American panel is no longer representative, which is, I think, the really dangerous thing. Like we have evolved and done all of our marketing and brand training from an era where there actually was a floor of rigor was substantially higher than it is today. So this is almost like a warning sign in terms of like, what does it take to get there? And even as we were going and doing this, okay, can we go and execute the study? We were speaking with InnovateMR, like where are we going to go and run into issues in being able to go and run this study? And a lot of it is we actually don't want to go and have the average buyer. Anybody know how much the average buyer is as a percentage of the population?
3.
0.7. It's a very small percentage of the population. And it's something that we go and miss. So I think this also kind of goes to like, where do you get nuance? Where do you get value? Where do you get insight? I'd love to kind of get a sense from you, Robin, on in the face of the tyranny of the averages, right? Average revenue, average customer, average purchase, average transaction price. How do you, from a qualitative approach, avoid the tyranny of averages?
Oh, gosh, tough question. But qualitative in itself, I mean, humans are really complex. Qualitative in itself is designed to do exactly that, or to help a brand do exactly that, which is to find those nuances, those insights that actually maybe push back against averages, because that's where you're going to have brand growth. That's where you're going to have revenue growth, right? It's not necessarily. And a lot of companies like, to have one answer when they do qualitative. Yes, that's validating to us. We're going to move in that direction, and oftentimes miss some nuances that potentially really can help grow revenue exponentially. But I'll take us away from that with a quick story. For example, we did a study for the government, and I find that the government is not represented here. They do things very differently, but they do a huge amount of research, right? So we were doing research for colon cancer testing, which is at the top of everybody's mind right now. They did everything right, zip coding, quant, the whole nine. And when it came down to testing advertising, after all that research had been compiled among Haitians in a particular zip code in New York City, what ended up happening was the marketing department said, let's go with advertising, let's make these beautiful ads, yay. Except the ads had a language that was not written. It was a spoken language, and no one picked up on that nuance. So we had these focus groups where people were like, I don't know what that is. It's beautiful, but I don't even know what it is. And because someone hadn't done the research and gotten the insight that, hey, this population of people over 50 it's not a written language, it's a spoken language. So you would have been better off with radio advertising, which of course the advertising company did not.
Yeah.
They did not come up with that. So this is where I think qualitative plays a huge and very significant role in terms of avoiding the tyranny of averages.
And I love what you put there, because we integrated qualitative components into both from a quality control point of view. So we're at an era now where we're fighting against bad actors and AIs representing themselves as humans informing bots. We did a review for another client of ours. They had 4,000 consumer study. 2,200 of them were fraudulent. They went and published it with the 4,000 sample size. When we removed the 2,200 fraudulent, it was different conclusions, but the cat was out of the bag. So what you're kind of pointing to there is also like having to know enough of the market context of what you can go and expect, right? It's the next step of causality. What should we be going and seeing when we backfill this in the marketplace?
So
So-
Edgar, how
yeah.
different were those respondents that you kicked out?
On that example, we're massive. So I'll put it this way. If we went and published this study without the quality control that we went and had on the athletic footwear category, you would go and assume that the challenger brands are not really material, because so many people are just going and pretending that these are the top 3 brands, top 5 brands in the category are it. But that's not the case. There's over 80 brands mentioned in athletic footwear that people are going and buying from that they think are strong enough to go and challenge the hegemony of Nike and Adidas. That's pretty significant, right? But you're not going to go and get that from looking at the average data, looking at the average syndicate information in the category. So that piece is there.
So
It was about a 30%.
Would have been fallacious.
Oh yeah, like a 30% difference in an interpretation of the data that is there. So what I'm curious to know, and when you're trying to go and execute on behalf of brands, Dennis, how do you avoid the tyranny of averages when clients are coming to you with syndicate data or analyst data that goes and says this is the direction of the category of the brand? How do you fight that off?
Well, you're bringing up a great point. In fact, I was at a client's office the other day here in Dallas, and we were having that very similar discussion because a lot of companies aren't investing in research. Actually, they're getting syndicated data, second party data, whatever, and they're making business decisions based on that. And that's the same data that everyone has. So there really isn't anything new to be found there. Relative to brands and relative to Nike, what's interesting is if you look at just the top line data that we even pulled from them, and you look at an average macro view, you're saying, hey, actually Nike's doing pretty darn well. They're still the category leader. They still have positive brand momentum. You saw in the that they're doing well with the younger generation. You go, great, we're actually doing better than we think we are. But when you look at where they're struggling, they've lost the narrative and the leadership on running, which is what that's their origin story. That's how the company and brand was built, was in running. And they've opened the door because of distribution. I love that because they pulled out of brick and mortar retail, went all in on D2C, assumed that's what how everyone buys. But no, we found in our own research and in the insights is that over a third of people are still buying at multi-brand brick and mortar retail, these products. And so that was a completely big cohort that was missed.
Yeah.
And Nike, as a famously strong branded organization relies on brand and brand storytelling. What we found also is that is not the case in this category right now. It's performance specs. That's what people are actually really looking at. But for certain demographics, we're also finding that brand is actually a factor. So you can't take a broad brush approach to all of it. You have to look at how the data is breaking down.
So if you kind of went and looked at this and you looked at the segmentation on averages, you would go and say, hey, Nike's the best brand in the category because their average score across multiple factors is really, really good versus everybody else. But when we go into the details, what you go and discover is that there's actually the pocketbook makes a difference. And while Nike has a lot of category leading perceptual attributes, when it comes to the financial side, it goes and actually has a weakness versus the rest of the category on price point relative to all of its other factors. So why is this relevant? Because we ran the study about 2 months before their big bad news in the summer last year on their future outlook. And we've now cross-referenced what the market told us that was here to what has happened in the past 10 months. And we predicted a revenue share decline, not because we were some, oracles from Greece, but because of the fact that the consumer went and said, we expect to buy less Nike as a share of our total athletic footwear. So we're not going to buy less Nike. It's the category is going to keep growing, but Nike's share of future growth is declining. And that is exactly what has happened in reality. And then this is the principle of the wisdom of the crowds that we went and had. And we went and took a look at, like, if you're making decisions off of the positives of Nike, you'd go and say, oh my gosh, like we're doing really well in the category. We're outperforming the industry, regardless of whether it's a male or a female buyer that is there. But then when you go and take a look at price point, and we're, especially in the current era of what we have in uncertainty around where things are going to go, price point all of a sudden becomes the dependent variable of determining behavior. It's not just brand reputation or performance or versatility or product innovation. Are people going to go and pay the money? And another thing that emerged in here, and I'm happy to share this with folks that are interested, is that brand alone accounted for less than 10% of the purchase of anybody in the category. Meaning that people are not blindly buying brands. They are buying products, and the brand is used to differentiate the product that they go and buy. And to what Dennis was pointing earlier, there's a multi-product category. There's very few Nike exclusive buyers, very few Hoka exclusive buyers. And I think it's this getting out of the tyranny of averages and just being single focused on what you know that is there. So I'd love to kind of build on what we're going in here, having here just like one additional slice on understanding the Nike story that's there, and you can go and see. It doesn't even register as a strong brand the older that you get. You go and see the challenger brands are actually a danger with the people who have the most money to spend. So Nike is suffering on price point. Guess who's doing better? These smaller challenger brands are doing better with the wealthier the buyer based on age cohort that is there. So what this brings back to me now is kind of a question back to the panel. What has changed in how you have to operate in what you do? So Chris, as a sample provider, finding these audiences, Rowan, in terms of you and actually talking to people that represent this, and Dennis, and working with your clients in kind of bringing this to market. Who'd like to start on this?
I can start. So as far as reaching a representative sample base, I think it goes back to having a diversified recruitment channel or strategy overall. So just some context for Innovate, we have, when we're recruiting members to our network, we have anywhere from 75 to 100 different recruitment campaigns happening at one time. So now we're not just focused on recruiting, to Edgar's point, a general population approach. We're actually recruiting based off of specific cohorts. So there's some channels that specifically are stronger in reaching the younger generations, the 18 to 24 types of populations. There's some, some channels that are just better at reaching, specific ethnicities, for example, and making sure that we have representation from a ethnicity perspective as well. So I think for sample companies and panel companies specifically, it really starts at the recruitment strategy and making sure that you have a diversified approach to recruiting those folks.
Thank you. I appreciate what you said there, because this is actually very similar to what you go and see in marketing. You don't go and run TikTok campaigns to go and hit every single generational cohort at the same rate. Right? There's gonna be that type of a bias. And what's been interesting in working with InnovateMR is to go and learn what it takes to actually reach the audiences that you need. And that actually changes the perception of how they interact with and about the brands that we're trying to go and get primary insights and information on. That's great. Dennis or Robin, what do you want to add to what has changed for you?
Yeah, I mean, just building on what Chris said, I mean, come on, I would turn the question around and say, what hasn't changed in how
That's
to reach
great.
consumers and customers? I mean, seriously, we're 2025. So not only has the way that we communicate changed, the way the channels, as you pointed out, it also has with recruiting, absolutely. But also to, your questionnaire or even your discussion guide in either research methodology has really changed in terms of how we reach consumers, how we reach customers, meaning that, and everybody thinks, oh, because a Black woman is talking, she must be talking about, ethnicity and race. No, those aren't the only things. The way that consumers think about marketing, social media has basically, it's the Wizard of Oz. They pulled the curtain back and said, hey, you know what? This product is made like this, right? So your advertising and your price point or whatever doesn't justify for me to spend like this. So how are you actually talking to them in the language that they're communicating in every day? They're on social media, 8 hours a day. Is your marketing thinking about, hey, what are the terminologies that people are using? And guess what? They don't speak like we speak. They don't use marketing terminology. They use everyday simple language, very similar to the way the administration talks today. Very simple, no big words, very simple. And it's all about how microcultures are beginning to emerge in terms of how the codes and how we talk to each other. Social media has been a game changer, whether you spend money on it or not. It's been a game changer. So it behooves you to spend some time to actually understand not just the algorithms, but how are people actually communicating with each other? What advertisers are they tapping into in terms of not just the ads? I was at an ARF conference last year and I was blown away. TikTok had a presentation with literally 6-second ads. Unilever came, a big automotive company came, they presented 30-second ads that seemed like a freaking 2-hour movie. TikTok understood, oh, I've got them for like 3 or 4 seconds. That's it. How do I communicate a story, beginning, middle, end, in 6 seconds? So you have to ask yourself, as a brand, am I using the same tools or am I creating a mini movie?
Mm.
How am I reaching my customer of today? Obviously, somebody that's, 25 years old might have a slightly different, you can use the same tools, you can cut an ad down. Their attention span might be 4 seconds, 3 seconds, versus someone who's older who says, okay, I'm gonna hang around for the whole story or something like that. So my question back is what hasn't changed?
Fantastic. I love that.
I have a sort of question about this presentation for Roben in particular, actually, but for all of you, is that you've been talking about, building and nurturing brands in a fragmented society, and you're looking at demographics. You're looking at age, you're looking at sex. You're not looking at culture, you're not looking at politics. Can you please talk about how that plays in?
So what comes out of this is that the ability of looking at this data, I went and left it at demographics and age because it's the most relatable piece that's there. But if you go and take the whole data set and you bias it around style and color, because that's your internal bias in terms of how you want to execute, it actually reruns the whole model completely differently. You're actually going to go and make decisions saying, well, I want to go and launch this type of style and here's my evidence for it. And you go and run it out and it'll look fantastic, but it'll not be financially feasible. And if you go and take a look at it, it's like, okay, we got to go and reduce our prices. What is that going to go and do? it's actually gonna disenfranchise a whole bunch other audience. There's so much data that was gotten generated out of us going to a representative sample of 1,000 consumers, but testing it over about 60 different dimensions. That we're beyond the era of single dimensional or cross-tab analysis. Yet, when we go back into this and we're going and showing you demographic segmentation, like the failure is happening at the basics. People are wanting the insights and the valuation at the intersection of these different variables, but they're not even getting it at the basics. Like we can't get an answer from most of the executives that we're speaking to. Who's your most valuable customer as a cohort, and why do your consumers or customers buy? I'm right now batting, like I wouldn't make it to a Major League Baseball team with the rate that I'm batting at getting that question answered today. And that is, I think, a very, very dangerous thing. And I think this is our bias in the room, because us running this study now across, what are we at, Dennis and Chris, like probably over about 5,000 brands between the different categories that we've gone and done. We are bullshitting ourselves. We think that we have this like beautiful like sophistication and nuance that we have to go and capture. Robin said it, get into the simple basics. If you can't understand the simple basics of why your category is being bought, all of the other data is almost meaningless. Which is why I kind of go back to, wow, I'm just looking at the basic data and there's fundamental differences that would go and change what's there. And we did an analysis of Nike's market positioning versus what the consumer base told us here, independent of Nike ever being involved. And they are a majority miss. Most of their messaging, most of their value proposition does not resonate with the category that spends $15 billion in America alone on footwear, on athletic footwear. Yes.
So what do you do going forward then? Do you risk alienating your younger people to target the older people? Do you try and find a point of commonality and then execute in different ways? Do you create different products, different people? Well, what's the solution?
I think a big part of it is managing your expectations. Like Jordan, who was in this study as well, totally age cohort biased. Nobody young knows who they are. So they have like the polar opposite score that is here for versus Nike. And Nike owns Jordan, for those of you who didn't know. Right? So Nike is like full like age cohort bias. So why is Jordan still doing well in terms of from a financial point of view, even though it's declining in share and everything like that? Because there's still people who are willing to go and pay $200 for a pair of Jordans. But there's not people that aren't willing to pay $100 for a pair of Nikes that are 18 years old. And that's the paradox that I think is that you're going and seeing here. And look, Jordan is suffering. Like every single measure is that Jordan is just going to bleed away and bleed away. But they have so much inertia that is there from an age cohort point of view. They're still 20 years away from having their Kraft Heinz moment of going and losing 50% of their value overnight. So that's kind of what I would say. But I'd like to kind of bring this back to Dennis, what has changed for you in terms of how you need to reach consumers in building and executing with your clients on brands?
Well, I'll speak to the cultural question that came up, and I think the use cases for products, Nike has a very myopic view of how the products are consumed and actually marketed, and that's by sport. So they're very fixed. It's like they only look at one category at a time. They look at all things running, basketball, soccer, etc. The consumer, and what we're finding out is they don't look at it that way. They don't buy that way. They don't consume the product that way. So what we found in our study is that culturally we're seeing multi-use cases for the same product. But when they see Nike, the way it's presented, the product doesn't fit the lifestyle and the culture that's being developed in wellness, athleisure, and a lot of other sort of subgenres of just health and wellness and activity. So I think where Nike's out of touch is they're sort of a brand designed for athletes, and so they're great for marathoners and people that are single-minded at that level. But when that trickles down into general population, how they're actually consuming the product, there's a mismatch. And so, in fact, we're going to be briefing them soon on this very thing, because I've already been talking to them about this, and they're, by full disclosure, they are our client, but what they can't get their head wrapped around is this cultural dissonance between how they actually have been their playbook for so many decades and actually what the market is evolving into.
And I would offer that the reason they do that is because it's less risky internally, right?
Mhm.
To pitch the party line rather than take on some risk and say, hey, that's not right. What we've been doing in the last 10 or 15 years.
So I want to throw it sort of back out to, what Joanna said, and I believe that what we're going to see happening with demographics, it's, we took great comfort in big numbers. right?
Yes.
To drive financial decisions. Oh, well, if 10,000 people are moving west, then we gotta have a vehicle that moves them west, because 10,000 people and your CFO is already clicking in his mind, oh,
Yep.
how's that gonna translate? And I would like to put out to the audience that actually that is changing, and hence the movement away from demographics. And I will give you an example of a study that we completed for media. Media isn't really represented in this room either. Big media conglomerate, one of the biggest in the world, we won't say their names, they were losing audience share. And in a big category, sports. We're gonna be talking about sports later, I understand, right? Big category. Why? And specifically baseball. Why was baseball losing audience across the entire country? And what can we do to bring back those viewers? Because, it wasn't happening. Long story short, we actually did a study that focused on one particular segment, a little bit of demographics, but more on attitudinal, how you view sports, where you were extra sports enthusiast versus just a regular, looking at the games or paying attention to the sports. Why? Because streaming had decimated their audience, and those podcasts.
Yeah.
Right? Damn those bastard podcasts. But anyway, what ended up happening, what we found out is small is mighty. Because we looked at a particular demographic that was their smallest audience. Why? Because that audience had an outsized impact on the rest of the viewers of baseball.
Yeah.
And so they got it, they understood, oh, hey, let's look for the intersection. Let's figure out how this small group of influencers is impacting the rest of the baseball audience across the country, and create programming that's gonna change, that's gonna turn the tanker around.
And that is, what I love what you're saying is, because this is what also came out in the Challenger Index, is when we looked at the fringe brands and we looked at them collectively, they go and outperform. But they don't outperform based on demographic factors, they outperform because of those cultural or use case cohorts. What came out of this, we actually did a full financial model, like we reconstructed the athletic footwear category from the spend data that came back from these consumers. Out of the 15 billion plus that is being spent on athletic footwear, just under 2 billion is being spent because they're athletic footwear. So just think about it for a moment. Less than 20% of the market is actually buying it for its intent. 80% of the purchase was because they were the most comfortable things. They were buying the category and the functionality first and adding the brand second. Does brand matter? Absolutely. But you got to meet the table stakes. And I think what's going on is, like, I could have gone and worked with the team on putting together any other kind of key driver that is here, but then we would have spent 20 minutes explaining to you why we chose that. The fact that every single demographic and primary brand association metric, when you get to the financial figures, is completely disconnected from the consumer's spectrum of why they buy, from the positioning statement, the shareholder analysis, the investor guidance that is being given by these companies, tells us how big of a disconnect there is between what people are coming up with inside their offices or their boardrooms as the director of driving categories. And I'll kind of put this as a personal hypothesis here. We are well beyond the era of category creation by fiat. We were able to do that as recently as the early 90s, but the society's too fragmented. In one of the other categories that we went and tested, 300 coffee brands are competing with Starbucks in America every year, consciously in the public eye. There are brands that we didn't even know existed because we hadn't been to those markets, but they're strong enough locally to be able to do this. And why I'm kind of putting this as a challenge is what has changed is that the consumer is now able to inform themselves how they want to on the category or the product that they want to go and buy. And if they need to, they can get it delivered 2 hours later if they're in like central Chicago and Manhattan. We don't have the control of the cycle. And I genuinely think that the business models are challenged. And this is why we went and launched the Challenger Index, is can we identify which business models are being challenged. We didn't go and take a look at the categories that are just status quo, nothing's changing, canned food, that probably is being challenged these days.
Right.
But the point of it that I'm trying to go and say is that the consumer is changing, the B2B customer is changing. And until you understand how they buy and why they buy, you don't figure out where you fit. So I'll kind of skip this in the interest of time and go to my last question for the panel, which is, if you could leave the audience with a most critical takeaway that you should either start doing this or stop doing that, going forward in building your businesses and brands, what would it be? Dennis, let's start with you.
I know it's gonna sound ridiculous, but get to know your customer. People don't spend enough time understanding the psychology of their customer, what they're really doing. They say they're customer centric, and every organization I walk into, I say, great, give me your data. I'd love to see it. They don't have it. They just don't spend it. Or it's 3 years old or something like that. It's like, there's just, so please encourage your clients or yourselves, invest in that. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Robin?
Oh, building on what Dennis said, I think cultural segmentation is gonna be, we used to call it building profiles back in the day, but I think cultural segmentation is making a huge comeback, especially in small micro groups. As we're fragmenting, it'll give you a better handle on what's gonna explode next, in addition to your synthetic data and all this other stuff.
And what I want to build on what you just said there is you want to go and still keep doing the basics, like still look at the segmentation of how those groups self-congregate around the fundamental of the demographics. I think we've thrown out demographics and firmographics and ethnographics in the interest of kind of just having everybody be vanilla, but that's not how the consumer is. The consumer is biased. I like hockey more than I like basketball, right? Somebody else likes basketball more than I like hockey. It's like, oh my gosh, we're never gonna buy the same thing the same way. Yes, we go and watch the same movies. We go and like traveling to the same destinations. So being able to kind of understand that is very critical. And Chris, how about yourself? What would be your?
Yeah, so I already mentioned a couple of different things, but definitely bringing your recruitment channel to the table before the research engagement begins is a really good opportunity to understand any firmographic or demographic holes. And then I guess especially when you're working with third-party vendors, understanding the channels for which the folks being recruited from, and the quality strategy that they're employing as well. So.
Thank you. So the questions for the room. Any takeaways for challenging the status quo? Or we're all hungry and we want to go for lunch. Well, Jerry, go ahead.
Maybe think about like in terms of like the B2B world, right? We talked a lot about demographics and attitudes. I wonder to what degree B2B businesses are really thinking about their customer firmographics and who owns it. So, that's something that, I continue to see a challenge. And within our organization, we're working with our finance organization to identify all of our customers and then tie together the business firmographics. So that's going to be a ripe opportunity as well, because I don't think that, when you reach a certain saturation point for net new customer acquisition, what are you going to do?
So it's a great point that you're making, because you got to go and still analyze things through the fundamentals. In industry, you have firmographics, industry graphics, buyer group profiles that is there that you have to account for. And look, it's just going back to why is this purchase happening, right? And I'll kind of go and put a plug to the conversation from before the break. Do not start with the dollars. One of the biggest things that we've gone and learned is that when we go and remove the dollars from the equation, and we actually take a look at what is the behavior, and then add the dollar value back to the behavior, you discover that the dollars are coming from behaviors that the clients or the brand owners do not expect. Why you're making money is not the reason that you think it is. And in a fragmented society, our notion of demographics can't be 50-50s. They need to be at this intersection of culture, demand, interest, ethnicity, et cetera, whatever you want to go and call it. Ethnicity doesn't determine purchase anymore, like it used to 30 years ago. It is called the cultural association and the demographic interplay that is there. And that is kind of the challenge that I pose to the room, is press the reset button and actually find out why you're bought.
One of the biggest problems that in B2B is that historically, particularly if you juxtapose it against B2C, right? they have just not invested in market research or in analytics, right, to any significant degree.
Right.
And given what I'm gonna be talking about tomorrow, right, that's kind of that, there's now a new constraint in the market. There's actually two, right, that are gonna be moving legally against that.
Well, I'm gonna end the discussion there for us. So thank you very much.